Good
All right, please go ahead.
So we're just going to talk a little bit about some very basic features of Arkansas caves and caves in the area, and then as well as talk a little bit about Ennis Cave, the cave that we manage in north central Arkansas that I think most of you have been there. Got some photos in the background, so you'll get some good views. The beginning slide here is a shot taken by some cave photographers that come down and visit us once or twice a year from Missouri. They're some guys that are all in their 70s, and they have all been cavers since they were some of them since they were children, and others since they were teens. So when you talk about experienced cavers, these guys have got it under their belt, and they have been doing cave photography most of that time. So they do some incredible stuff. Cave photography is a tricky thing to figure out. And so they've done things all the way with bulbs and changing out and all kinds of craziness. But this is one of the shots that they did in the main passage. It's kind of a junction. There's a feature called the toadstool. So yeah, on the left of the screen, you can barely see. I'm sitting on the edge over there for scale. So this is kind of one of those passage areas that most people, you just kind of walk through and junction to go into other areas. So you don't really necessarily pay that much attention to. There are no particular anything that's usually of much interest to folks. So it was kind of neat with all of their equipment that they could light it up so well, and you can get to see the different colors and just the whole thing. So that's just kind of where we started. So the other photos after that may not be as good because they were not taken by these guys.
And that's one of the things about cave photography is, you know, there's so much particulate matter in the air. And also, you know, when we're breathing and we worked up a little bit of a sweat and steam's coming off your head, and then you breathe and you can see that all this stuff shows up in photos. And when you have just a regular camera with a flash attached to it, you know, that flash comes from the point that you're looking at, and it tends to light up every little bit of dust or whatever's in the air, and it comes out crystal clear. But the rest of the things are sometimes leave a little to be desired.
So
side lighting is the big deal. If you light it from the sides, you don't get that.
So a few of the basic terms when we talk about caves are karst and cave, of course, and dissolution. You can talk about karst.
Yeah, it's just, and it's worded well. A landscape underlain by limestone. You know, there are certain areas in north central and northwest Arkansas that have a lot of caves around. North Central actually has a lot bigger caves than you'll find in Northwestern. They tend to be a little smaller over there, a little less limestone, maybe a little more dolomite. But the thing, you know, the limestone is basic by nature. It is alkali. It has a higher pH. So you've got that rock sitting there. You can take vinegar, and if you want to test something to see if it's limestone, you can actually drip vinegar onto limestone and watch it bubble and fizz, and so that's an acid-base reaction because the vinegar is a weak acid. So what happens is the old acid rain thing. We're picking up carbon dioxide in the air as the water comes down. And there's also a lot of carbon-rich stuff in the detritus on the surface of the ground. So as that organic matter has water run through it, it also picks up more carbon. So the acidity increases, and it gets into these little cracks and fractures, tiny fissures and whatnot in there, and it just works over time to dissolve away little bits and pieces. And the other end of dissolving that is the deposition of those minerals. So as that dissolves, most of your limestone is calcium carbonate. So once that runs off somewhere else and that water begins to evaporate or it sits still for a while, those minerals will settle out. And that's where we come up with splenothyms or formations. Formations are actually rock, but everybody calls them formations, so we call them formations as well. But and there's a multitude of different types, and it depends on, you know, airflow. It depends on, is it in the water where this happens, or is it a drip? Is it the drip from the ceiling that becomes a stalactite, and eventually below it a stalagmite starts, and at some point they meet and it becomes a column. There's these cool things called rimstone dams as pools of water start to basically the minerals go to the outside edge of the pool of water and it builds up, and it makes these neat little little dams, and so with water in them, and they tend to go either uphill or downhill. And the old timers called them fish ladders, because they said a fish could get in there and they could jump from one to the other and actually go up, and that's really not feasible, but it's a neat idea. You know, you get into curtains, the large sheets of calcium carbonate that come down. Some of it is thin and you can see light through it, and it'll have really light spots and really dark spots, and we call that cave bacon. It looks just like big giant pieces of bacon on the hanging down. So, and then you get into the little helictites, and I think we've got maybe some photos of those in here, and those things are crazy. They have no real direction. They just do what they want. They grow in weird directions, and recently we've seen something that there may actually be a biological reason for that, and there may be some type of they're not exactly sure if it's a bacteria or what, but it's something that they feel like is controlling the path that they take, because it's the circuitous route. It may be a curlicue or a circle or a question mark or whatever. So, but so
other terminology, cave. So obviously the karst, the dissolution, all that kind of explains. I mean, it's a big underground, it's a hole in the ground, you know, a big chamber. Usually when you refer to a cave, it's something that naturally occurred. But also cave, and something we appreciate is that cave being used as a verb, to go caving. So we often get corrected, or people will say, you know, you're spelunking, and we say, no, we're caving. So when we get to the end, we'll kind of talk about that and how in the caving community, that's more of a fun term, and how we use that amongst our group of folks. Let's see. So just a little more about dissolution and how just what Doug said about the rainwater picking up the carbon dioxide. Arkansas being home to limestone and sandstone caves.
Most of the sandstone caves will be in the lower areas of the state. There's quite a few sandstone caves with a lot of quartz in them around hot springs. Now those caves, they only may be 20 feet deep, 10 feet deep, or it may just be a big crack. But it's so you don't see these massive long cavern systems with sandstone, and really the outside of lava tubes, that's about limestone is about the only place where you really find these big cavern systems. Like we were talking about earlier, the Devil's Den State Park, it's got a lot of giant slots and crevices that have been eroded out, and they provide great cover for the bats, and it's an interesting place. You can be in a cave and not feel completely confined, because there's always an opening. I snuck off and went back in the cave when I was a very small child, so I was the first cave rescue up there. They said it was rescue. I was fine. I was just hanging out, but everybody else was freaked out.
Some of the limestone caves in Arkansas, so the longest right now is documented. They have mapped about 9 miles of cave, and that's considered the longest documented cave in Arkansas. It's on federal land, it's closed, it's very tight. Yeah, You can't get in there. But then Ennis is actually in the top 10 on the longest caves in Arkansas, documented caves in Arkansas. So right now we have around 4 miles of cave that are documented or mapped. Mapping caves is another. There's a whole group of people that do that. But we also, as far as Ennis goes, there is more cave than that. There are areas of the cave that we are aware of, that we visit, that have not actually been added to the map. So we know there's more than that. We also know that there are some areas, or we feel pretty certain that there are some areas of the cave that are blocked from debris, from breakdown from years ago, from a cave-in, probably caused from the blasting when they were mining the area. That from the locals, from tales from the locals, that's where the actual big part of the cave is. So in our minds, we've only just tipped the surface there, that there's way more to explore. It's just a matter of gaining access to that. So, but it's pretty cool that we get to manage and take people to visit one of the longest caves in Arkansas.
And this Ennis Cave is it's located in Stone County, outside of Mountain View, in between Mountain View and Batesville, actually. And when we're given the directions, there's always there's a historic marker up there, and that's where the Confederate flag is, and it's it's like, turn at the Confederate flag, and people go, whoop. But it's the cave itself was purchased back in the 30s by a mining company, and they mined for manganese to use in metallurgy. And they did that for several years, and they hit the big giant pockets that were close to the entrance, and they cleaned most of that out. They shut down operations just prior to World War II, and they revisited multiple times over the years to go back and do an analysis to see if it was worth it to take it out, and it never was, which is good for us, because there was a lot of damage done by the blasting in there. That's like, there's a giant hole over the top of the entrance, and it was where they set up basically like a tripod to take out the ore. So that's in place, and there's weird erosion that goes on. That's why it caved in several times over the years. And then in 1985 is when the current owners bought it, Kevin and Randy Rose, and they spent 6 or 7 months right after they purchased it with just a huge influx of cavers coming in and volunteering to help. Bucket brigades taking out tons and tons of dirt at the entrance, and they finally broke through. They went in, it was starting to rain, and they went in, they had a look around, and on the way out, Tim, he's a gentleman that lives up there at the property. He was the main digger, and he was the last one out, and as he stepped out, it collapsed again. So then they brought in structural engineers and whatnot, and basically set up, they did a grid work with rebar, and poured a lot of concrete in, and we're able to keep this open, and it's been open for 35 years now without any issue. There's a culvert. It's about a 40-inch culvert diameter, and it's 40 feet long, and it goes at an angle down into the hole. There's a ladder in it, and it's a lot of people are kind of leery of the ladder, but the thing is, you're in a tube. Even if you were to start to fall, you're not going to go anywhere. You might catch a leg inside the ladder or something like that and injure yourself, but it's not like you're just hanging off a ladder at 40 feet that's exactly vertical.
Now, if you lean back too far, you and your pack stick to the inside of the pipe, so you just hang out for a minute.
The locals down there are pretty colorful, and she put in the information on there. Is most of the caves in North Arkansas, there's the thing of, well, Jesse James hid treasure in it, but apparently when the mining started, there was the double J thing at the bottom, and they're pretty sure he was there. It's on a road called Younger Access, and the Younger are the descendants of Cole Younger, which was part of Jesse James' gang. And then the Fords and Kellys, all these folks that lived there, their descendants are still there, and a lot of them are still kind of outlaws, I guess. I think meth.
They're colorful characters.
Yes, and the meth epidemic moved through there and hit those folks pretty hard, and that has since kind of like White Nose, it washed through, and now we're left with. But at least we don't have that to deal with these days. But on the Biotica, we enjoy the critters, cave fish, cave salamanders, cave crickets, or camel crickets, or however you, all kinds of little tiny stuff. Most of them are arthropods. We've got springtails, isopods, amphipods that look like little tiny shrimp, and may always live in just one little pool of water for their whole life. Springtails are cool. They don't know where their direction is. They can either be in water or on dry land. So they've got a little ratcheting system in their tail, and they basically ratchet up, and it just fires them off into the air. And if they land in water, they adapt and they live in water. If they land on land, and
apparently they have no control. They just go wherever their spring takes them, is what we've been told by the biologists. So the background photo Doug took, this is in Ennis, and this is a little tricolor bat. He's got water droplets all over him, so he looks kind of crystallized, but he's healthy and alive and had good little happy pink elbows. And
the tricolors are kind of cool. They're each hair there's three different distinct bands of color, and it varies among the population. So this is what we would call a blonde tricolor. When it's not covered in water droplets, they're very blonde looking. There's also some that are almost black. There's some that are more of a reddish brown. So it's you can always tell if it's a tricolor because it's about a little bigger than a chicken nugget, and they've got little pink elbows that shine out, like she said.
Also, as far as the up top portion of the property there, the owners have deemed it a no hunting zone. So they own 20 acres there, and then it is surrounded by about 380 acres. The surrounding, it does not belong to them, so that those are local folks that there is a lot of hunting on that property. But as far as the Ennis property itself, there's no hunting. So we have deer families there. We have a doe that we have watched now for like 5 years with her different generations of babies come through. We did have a really healthy possum population, and they've kind of dwindled, but we've got chipmunks have come and gone. We've had a healthy hawk population there for a few years. They decided to raise their babies on the property, so the chipmunk population went down.
As did the squirrels.
Yeah, and squirrels. Like we said, we seem to have a really good red bat population. They're fun to watch. They come out a little earlier in the day than a lot of the other bats, and like the tricolors or the evening bats or any of those. So they'll actually come out when it's still late afternoon. And so when they'll zip around through the valley up there, and sun will still be out, and so you get glints of the sun hitting them. And for quite some time, we thought we had cardinals or some type of red bird that we kept seeing, because when the sun would hit them, they were so bright. And then we finally discovered that we actually had red bats we just didn't realize how early they came out during the day. So they're very active and do lots of crazy acrobats back and forth through the valley, and they're fun to watch. So when it comes down to caving at Ennis, or caving in general, there are always some basic rules and expectations that go along with that. Caving anywhere has proper gear and following White Nose protocol for cleaning your gear and transporting your gear. things like that. As far as Ennis goes, though, we do have some things that are specific to that property. You do have to have permission to be on the premises and to go in the cave. So for anyone in the caving community that may contact us that would like to go on a caving trip, they have to have permission to be there. Not only is the property locked, the cave is gated and locked, so they have to have permission to be there. They have to have permission for a trip in the cave. We don't allow folks to go in the cave that have never been in there before if they are not with an experienced trip leader. We just feel like that's the responsible thing to do. You also, because of the owners require that everyone has to sign a liability waiver for their property, and that includes up top or in the cave. So, and that's the case with most of the privately owned caves in Arkansas or anywhere, is that most landowners have liability waivers that they require that you sign, which makes sense. There's a lot of fear. That's one of the things that in the past has tended to keep people from allowing folks to explore caves on private property, is they're worried that someone will get hurt or something will happen and they'll be responsible. So it's kind of become common practice for folks to just have a liability waiver that you sign, and then you're in better shape, or hopefully you get to go. As far as proper gear, and for those of you that have been, you know, helmet, lights, 3 sources of lights, gloves. Common misperception. A lot of folks think that when we tell them you need gloves and we talk about the temperature of the cave is 58 degrees year round, they tend to think that gloves are to protect them and keep their hands warm. And we will let them know quickly that I'm not concerned about your cold hands, that the gloves are strictly there to protect the cave, that, you know, the oil's on your hands. If you touch something, you know, they can stop the growth of the formation. Just that little bit of oil off of your hand can do that. So wearing the gloves is a must. Having appropriate footwear, that's good for the cave and good for you. You don't want to struggle. And we have learned the hard way that not having the proper footwear can make your trip twice as hard. So you will struggle more if you're slipping and sliding in the mud with something that doesn't have as good a grip, you know. Knee pads, and then just having a small pack and your water and your extra batteries and, you know, some emergency supplies with you. When you go caving, you always let someone that is not going in the cave know that when you're going in and when you expect to be out. And the polite and proper thing to do is to let them know when you do come out. That way, if you don't come out on time, they will know, and you let someone know that knows who to contact. There are a group of cave rescue folks in the state of Arkansas now that has just come together in the last couple of years. But also, and folks in the caving community know that if you say, I'm going to be out of the cave at 6 o'clock, that they don't start worrying until 8 o'clock. Because when you go in the cave, it's easy to lose track of time. You can get stuck looking at formations or whatever and just not make it out when you thought you were going to. So even with notifying someone, no one's getting in a panic and calling in rescue folks for you for a few hours past your time, just because we all know how that goes. Well, one of the things that we promote heavily when we're taking new folks caving is to help each other out. Lend a hand, lend a foot, whatever you need. Sometimes when you're climbing something, it comes back to different body types and things as well. That whereas Doug is 6'4" and I'm 5'7", the difference in our height and leg length can be the difference in he can just climb right up something with ease, where I may struggle on my own for 20 minutes just surely for the fact that I don't have the span to make it across something.
But at the same time, my femurs are great and long, and to negotiate a tight spot, she will do better than I will, and to get through. So for all the different features there are in caves, there's something for everyone, and there's something that everyone will do better than someone else at. So it's kind of neat as you go and you figure this out.
Yeah, we've had plenty of folks tell us, say, oh, well, I'm worried, I have really short legs. Are we going to, or I'm taller, or I'm bigger, or I'm whatever. And it's like, just wait, because there will be your spot in the cave where it's your perfect place. And people, I think, tend to gravitate towards those things where it's, oh, this fits me perfect. That tends to be the kind of place you enjoy the most. One of the other things that we really try to preach to new caving folks is don't try something underground that you can't do above ground. So if you can't climb, if you don't climb outside, then don't try to climb a big place underground. Gravity works the same, it doesn't change underground.
Just a lot harder to get you back up.
Yeah. So that's just something we try to really make people stop and think about, because it is a different environment, and something about the dark and the cool, and you don't tend to, get hot and sweaty as quick as you would up top. There's just something, it gives you some false confidence sometimes. And we have all put ourselves in that position, and we know.
And I'm a retired paramedic, and I've also been through the ACRC cave rescue stuff and whatnot, and so it's I just don't want to use that stuff. I mean, that's why I'm retired. but it's good to have the knowledge. We do have a lot of rescue gear up there. We've outfitted it really well with we've got stretchers. We've got the whole 9 yards up there that we basically provided ourselves.
And we also are in close contact with other cave rescue folks. So there's a good number of those people that are certified. There are different ones that have been through varying levels of certifications in the state. And like I said, that's just come into play in the last couple of years. Prior to that, there were no cave rescue folks in the state of Arkansas, a state that has over 2,000 caves, and we didn't have actual people that were certified and knew the right ways to package somebody up if you were 2 miles back in a cave with a broken leg, how to get you out of there safely. And so now we have those folks, and it's a good network of people, and they are easy for us to reach. So that's something we're very happy that has come together pretty recent. Some other things that we really, and some of the other caving community, don't always follow the same kind of guidelines that we set, but we really harp on stay with the group. There's nothing like turning around and the 17-year-old kid that you brought into the group, and you've got 10 people in there and you can't find him. Even though he may be an experienced caver as well, you can't find him. And the panic that sets in, the anxiety that comes with backtracking and trying to locate that kid. So we are just really, really stay with the group. And especially if you are someone, if you've not been there before, if you don't know your way around, don't pay attention, and don't get stuck looking at a formation on the wall while the rest keeps moving.
We always try to have one trip leader at the beginning and one at the end. That way we can kind of keep things, in between.
Yeah, we try to have experienced people who someone is leading the group, and then what we call somebody's running tail, which means you're bringing up the tail end of the group. And so between the two of you, and depending on the number of people, if we have a larger group, then we will make sure that we have more experienced people in there. But we also put the responsibility on those people to make sure you know how many people you have with you, that you stop and count heads ever so often. And when we take some of the college groups and some younger folks in, we absolutely do a head count. We number everybody off, and we, ever so often stop and make them, count off. We will go so far as to also say, we're going to put in the buddy system. So you have one person that you're responsible for knowing where they are. And if you don't know where they are, you alert somebody, and, we go from there. But we haven't had any problems. People tend to, experienced cavers sometimes get a little put out with our ideas of how we should do that. But we really enjoy taking new folks caving and getting them to have that experience and hopefully want to go back again. Some other things that we do are don't touch stuff. Just don't touch stuff. There is nothing more tempting than a soda straw with a drop of water on the end of it that's right at eye level, and you want to touch that fingertip to that thing so bad that you can't hardly stand it. And I don't know what that is, but that fingertip touching that could be the thing that makes that stop growing. So we just tell people, just don't touch stuff.
Put your hands behind your back and lean up and look at it, and it's just
take
fine.
A picture or whatever, but just don't touch it. That seems contrary to the next thing, which is maintaining 3 points of contact. But maintaining 3 points of contact is while you're moving, when you are, when you're climbing, when you're sliding down something, whatever, use your hands, use your feet, use your butt, use your elbow, use your knees, whatever, but just make sure that you've got 3 points making contact with the ground to give you stability. And there's nothing like the false confidence of going over something and then realizing halfway through crossing something that now you're off balance. And, a lot of folks don't want to sit on their butt and slide. And we tell them that's another point of contact, and you're going to be really stable if you're that low to the ground.
In a bad spot, we've actually used an elbow, a heel, and a forehead.
Yes.
to get through stuff. So that's 3 points, and you're always more stable with 3 points than you are standing up on 2.
And learning to going back to helping each other when you are maintaining those 3 points. And sometimes if you've got to go up a mudslide that is just slick, it can be extremely difficult. And so if the person behind you can plant their heel into the side of that slide and you use their foot as a step, or something like that, we strongly encourage that, because there's no point in struggling and wearing yourself out when you're there to enjoy it. So one of the other things in a cave is, like most hiking and anything else, is pack it in, pack it out. So whatever goes in with you has to come back out with you.
We spent about 2 years doing cave cleanup in there, and right now it's probably as pristine as it's ever been. We've gotten the majority of graffiti and a lot of that stuff was from years ago from surveying, and just little bits of trash, little pieces of flagging, little caps to water bottles. And
when you're sitting there in the dark and you've stopped to take a break to eat a snack, it's very easy to drop that little piece of wrapper off of your granola bar or something and not even realize you did it. So we try to encourage folks to take a look around before you get up and take off again, and just be very careful.
We'll eventually find it and pick it up.
Yeah. The other thing is following proper white nose syndrome protocol for your gear. So gear, right now we know that white nose can stay on your gear and stay live for 48 to 72 hours. So that means if you come out of the cave and you throw your gear in the trunk of your car and leave it there for 2 or 3 days, it can stay live and active there. And for cavers and folks that go from one cave to another, if you're visiting multiple caves, and that's not uncommon for people to have a caving weekend where they might go to different caves. So you have to be mindful of those. You can't wear that gear into a cave that you know has had white nose in it and then turn around and the next day pull that gear out and put it back on to go in a different cave.
So we just pretend like all caves have white nose.
Right. We figure that's just the safest way to be. You can use their, like 409, and there's some products out there with bleach and all that. The downside of all that is it kills your caving gear. The threads on your boots are going, your knee pads are going to come apart. Everything's going to be ruined. So with some of the biologists and the folks working on the research, they've also figured out that really hot water, like boiling water. So now it's kind of, when you come out of the cave and you take your gear off, you step it off into a big garbage bag, you seal it up good, and it doesn't get opened until you're back to where you can properly clean it. And then boiling water and hot water and a big wash tub, and tossing everything in from your boots to, your bandana, and letting it soak in the hot water. And that has become part of the newer protocol that's acceptable and shows a way to maintain your gear, because sometimes your gear is not cheap, and still actually fight the disease and not take a chance on spreading it. Some ways that Ennis Cave is kind of unique. Most caves offers more or less one type of terrain. So there are caves that are referred to as wet caves or dry caves. You know, you might have a cave that has a stream bed all the way through it, a wet stream bed all the way through the whole cave.
We've done one that was a little over 2 miles of chest deep water to get into the dry part of the cave.
Yeah. So most of them have a primary feature like that, wet, dry, or maybe they have, maybe it's primarily crawling passages, or maybe it's primarily climbing, or, you know,
Super
whatever their
vertical.
primary type of, vertical pits, whatever. But Ennis is different in that it offers that you have a good amount of walking passage where you can just walk, other than, you know, it's rocky. It's not like walking on a sidewalk, but you can still stay upright and walk without having to crawl and not having to climb. And you can do an entire caving trip that way.
And we've got pretty clearly delineated paths through there, because if people stay on the same path, then they don't wind up spreading mud all over everything,
doing damage to other places. So, but it also, Ennis, you can go in and you can do a trip where you walk as much as you want. You can also do as much crawling as you want into different areas. I mean, there are some really cool areas in the cave where you have to crawl, whether it be belly crawling or knee crawling, for quite some distance. There's also a 100-foot waterfall in the cave. So to get there, you have to traverse some wet passage, some sumps that you have to get in. On a good day, it's just thigh-high water, but you're also leaned over to get through that. On a bad day, it's
we call it a near dip.
Yep. You're gonna get wet and cold.
There's the top, and there's your ear, and there's the water. So
and there are places where, you know, tight squeezes. There are big giant what cavers call a big giant borehole passage. So they're giant and huge. So
you don't even have to duck or lean over. You just walk.
You know, they can be 30 feet high and, you know, 20 feet wide, and you're just walking through. So it's very unique in that you can actually choose the kind of trip you do. So for the folks that are less inclined to want to crawl, or maybe they are claustrophobic and they are not willing to go try out a crawl or a tight squeeze, they can just wander around in these big open passages and do what they, you know, pick what they enjoy about it.
Tons of fossils down there too. There's a fossil layer that runs all the way through the cave that you can just stand and look at forever. It's find all kinds of little features in that.
As far as traversing the cave, though, the only exception to choosing what kind of trip you like to do is the ladder, because the 40-foot ladder in is also the 40-foot ladder out. So the only way in and out of there is going up and down that ladder. So that's where you don't get a choice.
And that's a picture of our daughter. And if you look at the hole, there's a hole that we found one New Year's Eve. It was starting to flood a little bit. And there's a spot in the dry stream passage within Ennis that we saw a lot of water, you know, coming down through the stream passage. And we went around some things and back to the stream passage, and it was dry on the other side. So we backtracked again and went down another little piece of passage that most people never go down. And the water was coming out like a geyser out from under some rocks. And the picture of our daughter, that little hole she's climbing out of, is where the water was blowing out of. This spot where I'm sitting in the picture that's up now.
Sorry, I was trying to show the one of her again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that's the picture of her coming out of the hole. It was tight. Now we've opened it up a little more, and what we found is after that dried out and the water went back down, we went back up there, and we discovered a new area. It's probably about 40 feet wide from top to bottom. It's about 35 feet deep from where you enter to the bottom, where I went down into a little gravel pit and dug that out, and actually got up got my head into a stream passage that nobody knew was there. So it was very exciting.
Yeah, a whole new level of the cave that we didn't know was there.
So this is me gearing up to actually go down to descend into that and find out what's down there, and that was exciting.
So our last little thing there is cavers rescue spelunkers. So that is kind of our little joke in the caving community. I'm trying to get back to stopping the share. Here we go.
One of the, we were talking about misunderstood with bats, and Emily did a great job of explaining the misunderstood. And it's kind of the same with caves. So a lot of people will view caves or pits or holes in the ground as problematic. Farmers, back in the old days, they would, and even now, they'll fill in if they find a pit or a sinkhole or something like that. They could lose livestock in it. There's some up on Gaither Mountain outside of Harrison that they lost numerous livestock, horses, cows, everything in. And so there's this story that they let 200 feet of giant logging chain down in there with a piece of meat on it, and it chewed the end off of it. So there's monsters down there. But it keeps people out of it, which is good for conservation.
Most of them will fill them in, use them like a dump.
They'll use it like a dump, and we found that on numerous ones. Most of them farther down on the Ozark Plateau, just before you get to, say, Van Buren County. There's some areas there where there are a lot of fingers of limestone coming out. So with that, there's also a lot of little pits around there, and they tend to want to fill those in with trash, junk, whatever. They make a good dump pile. And we've actually gone miles back into a slot cave that went way back into the side of the mountain. And we'd find pieces of screen and pieces of old stuff that had washed down. So we know on the other end of that there's a dump pit. There's the cleanup guy, the expert, John Beard out of Missouri. They have gone to places where they had heard stories about a cave being there and actually excavated tons and tons and tons of junk and old cars and tires and wheels and everything else out, and found these beautiful caves that were just completely blocked off. So that's part of the misconception part there. And they fill them in. It's yeah, they just disappear. Oh, I disappeared. I disappear too. Yeah, the caves disappear when you fill them in. I disappear when I lean over. But,
all right. Thank you all. That was a great presentation. I appreciate it.